I've been tracking upcoming MMORPGs obsessively for years, and looking ahead to 2026, there are over 20 projects that could potentially launch. Some are close, some are ambitious, and a few might already be dead. But as we've all learnt with MMORPGs, nothing is ever truly dead until it's officially cancelled. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through every MMORPG I know of that could realistically launch in 2026. From early access releases already locked in, to risky passion projects, AAA experiments, and a few question marks that may never see the light of day. Past Fate is an open-world fantasy MMORPG built around player freedom in a classic medieval setting. The game leans heavily into exploration, sailing, and sandbox-style progression, letting players travel between continents and islands, build settlements and ships, and take part in group dungeons and large-scale PvE encounters. I've tested Past Fate in its early state, and it clearly positions itself closer to old-school MMOs that value freedom and world interaction over guided theme park design. During early access, the developers are planning to expand the game with new zones, quests, raids, world bosses, conquest systems, and deeper naval gameplay. Past Fate enters early access on January 7th, and it's one to watch if you enjoy slower, exploration-driven MMOs. Hytale is a voxel-based sandbox RPG that sits somewhere between a traditional MMORPG and a fully moddable survival game. It blends open-world exploration, RPG-style progression, responsive combat, and deep building systems inside a procedurally generated world filled with dungeons, creatures, and hidden events. What stands out is how it visually looks like Minecraft, while mechanically leaning more towards classic RPG combat, including sword and shield gameplay and structured PvE encounters. The early access release focuses on exploration, combat, building, and creator-first tools, with community servers and minigames planned as the game evolves. Hytale enters early access on January 13th, and it's shaping up to be one of the most ambitious sandbox RPG projects for a long time. Epitome is a next-generation fantasy MMORPG built around AI-supported NPCs and large-scale shared worlds. The core idea is that NPCs aren't static quest givers. They can hold voice-to-voice conversations, remember past interactions, negotiate rewards, and dynamically shape quests and dialogue based on player choices. What's important to clarify is that the game itself isn't made by AI, it's built by a traditional development team, with AI used specifically to bring NPCs and world interactions to life. At launch, Epitome features 4 playable classes, a shared world designed to support tens of thousands of players, and a firm no pay-to-win stance. Instant access begins via Kickstarter in January 2026, making this one of the more experimental and ambitious MMORPG projects heading into 2026. Monsters and Memories is a classic old-school MMORPG heavily inspired by early EverQuest, built around slow, deliberate progression and group-focused PvE. I've played this one and it's unapologetically retro. You're expected to figure things out, remember commands, and work closely with other players, and take your time with combat and progression. It deliberately rejects modern conveniences like fast travel and solo-friendly design in favour of social dependency and meaningful group play. Personally, it's maybe a little too retro for me. I grew up on Tibia rather than EverQuest, but it's clearly a passion project and one of the strongest classic-style MMORPGs currently in development. Monsters and Memories is planning to enter early access in Q1 2026, though that timeline could shift as testing continues. Eldramoor: Haven in the Mist is an ambitious VR MMORPG built around social play, exploration, and flexible class design. I've actually backed this one on Kickstarter, partly because MMORPGs in VR are incredibly rare, and Eldramoor feels like a genuine attempt to do it properly rather than create some kind of gimmick. The game focuses heavily on community with shared dungeons, PvP, crafting, and social spaces, while letting players freely swap classes and build on a single character. Following a successful Kickstarter campaign, alpha access for backers is now planned for March 2026, with more testing phases to follow. Building an MMO in VR is a huge challenge, but if Eldramoor pulls it off, it could become one of the most important VR MMORPGs that we've ever seen. Camelot Unchained is a realm versus realm focused MMORPG designed by Mark Jacobs, the creator of Dark Age of Camelot. and it's built almost entirely around large-scale PvP. The game features 3 distinct realms, player-built cities and fortifications, deep crafting systems, and massive battles where territory, resources, and structures can be destroyed and rebuilt by players. PvE exists, but it mainly serves the PvP war effort, including shared RVR dungeons like the Depths, where all 3 realms clash for control. I haven't played Camelot Unchained, but at this point its biggest issue isn't design, it's time. With development stretching over more than a decade, much of the original hype has faded, and while early access was previously targeted for 2025, it's now realistically slipping into 2026. Soulframe is a fantasy action RPG from Digital Extremes, designed as a slower, more deliberate counterpart to Warframe. I have played this one, and despite being labelled as a pre-alpha, it's already surprisingly polished, to the point where it honestly feels playable right now. Combat is weighty and melee focused, exploration is calm and atmospheric, and the opening sequence where your character's traits are shaped before birth immediately sets it apart. That said, this isn't a traditional MMORPG. There's no massive persistent world, and other players are entirely optional. Instant access is already available through Founders Packs on the website, with a full launch currently expected for early 2026, making Soulframe a strong RPG experience, but one that MMO players should approach with the right expectation. MapleStory Classic World is an official old-school MapleStory server run by Nexon, built as a faithful recreation of the game before the Big Bang update. It's being developed as a full part of global MapleStory, not through the MapleStory Worlds platform, and is led by the original MapleStory designer Nemi, who worked on the game back in the early 2000s. The goal is to preserve classic progression, social grinding, and iconic early zones while adding modern quality of life improvements like widescreen support. With multiple private playtests already held, and even an in-person testing event in California, this looks very close to launch, with likely release window in early 2026. Arvita is a hardcore fantasy MMORPG that leans heavily into social gameplay, logistics, and server-wide cooperation. Originally a solo dev project, it's now backed by a newly formed studio called Raid Wipe Studio, giving the game far more resources and faster development pace. Arvita focuses on party-driven combat, deep crafting, territory control, and a unique player versus developer system where live GMs and systems react to player actions in real time. Cities can fall, territories can be lost, and the world genuinely changes. Combat is weighty and deliberate with no fast travel, real supply management, and meaningful death consequences. Early access is currently targeting Q2 2026 with a one-time box price and optional no pay-to-win monetization. SpiritVale is a free-to-play, class-based action MMORPG inspired by old-school titles like Ragnarok Online, but designed with modern real-time combat. Players choose from familiar archetypes such as warrior, mage, rogue, or summoner, then progress through branching skill trees, gear customization, crafting, and card systems. The focus is on exploration, loot hunting, and party-based PvE rather than automation or auto-play. It's a solo developer passion project that's still actively evolving, with early access planned for mid-2026, a full wipe at early access launch, and a clear stance against pay-to-win monetization. Secret Forest is a cross-platform MMORPG coming to PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo Switch 2, making it one of the few upcoming MMOs targeting all major platforms at once. Set in a fantasy world divided between light and darkness, it focuses on player choice, faction alignment, and a story-driven progression. Players choose from 10 distinct races, zodiac-based stat bonuses, and a wide range of professions, blending combat, crafting, exploration, and social systems like marriage and shared progression. Combat is designed to be tactical rather than purely stat-based, with level equalized zones to keep content fair and accessible in group play. With closed beta approaching, Secret Forest is positioning itself as a broad, accessible MMORPG built for both console and PC audiences. Adrullan Online Adventures is a classic-inspired, voxel-based MMORPG built around exploration, community, and slow, meaningful progression. I played a test last year, and it is very retro, no hand-holding, there's no minimap, and a real emphasis on physically exploring the world and learning it yourself. Combat is slower and more punishing, enemies hit hard, and preparation actually matters, which really leans into that old school adventure feel. Recent patches have added more content, better combat balance, and improved UI, with the main focus right now being server stress testing ahead of launch. If you're looking for a forgiving MMO, this isn't it. But for players who miss demanding, exploration-driven MMORPGs, Adrullan is definitely one to look out for in 2026. Stars Reach is a sandbox science fantasy MMORPG built around fully simulated, living worlds in a shared single galaxy. What makes it stand out is the scale and ambition. Planets evolve even when players are offline, environments can be permanently changed, and everything from crafting to politics is driven by players rather than scripted systems. The game is currently running frequent playtests, including recent stress tests, which is a strong sign the team is now focusing on server stability and scalability. With no classes, horizontal progression, deep crafting, and even player-run planetary governments, Stars Reach feels like a modern attempt to deliver on ideas last seen in games like Star Wars Galaxies. If they can make this all work at scale, it could be one of the most interesting sandbox MMORPGs heading into 2026. Afterglow is a mobile sandbox MMORPG set in a post-apocalyptic American Southwest, 77 years after a nuclear war. It's designed specifically for busy players with offline progression that lets you queue actions like gathering, crafting, and exploration while you're away, then come back to meaningful progress. The design philosophy is genuinely interesting: turn-based combat, a player-driven economy, optional PvP zones, and a strong stance against pay-to-win. It's currently in alpha testing on Android and iOS through flight test, with a full release planned for 2026, and it feels like a rare attempt to deliver real MMO depth in short, manageable play sessions. Grimrain is an indie fantasy MMORPG currently running regular playtests on Steam. It leans into classic MMO structure with a strong mix of solo and group content, including instance dungeons, open world dungeons, gathering, crafting, player housing, and scripted boss encounters. Character progression is skill based rather than rigid classes, letting players train into melee combat, elemental magic, witchcraft, healing, or defensive roles depending on how they play. The game also features a membership style monetization that unlocks social and quality of life features rather than raw power. Grimrain feels like a slower, system driven MMO aimed at players who enjoy exploration, preparation, and steady progression rather than fast and flashy combat. Scars of Honor is a free-to-play fantasy MMORPG that recently appeared on Steam, with early access currently targeted for Q3 2026. It's built around skill-driven, reactive combat with a strong emphasis on timing, positioning, and player mastery rather than passive rotations. The recent development livestream showed a game that already looks surprisingly far along, with deep class customization through talents and permanent scars that shape how your character actually plays. The game also features evolving roguelike style dungeons, structured PvP modes, and a firm no pay to win stance. Performance in that stream was a bit choppy, likely dev server related, but overall, Scars of Honor is one of the more promising new MMORPGs potentially aiming for 2026. Chrono Odyssey is a next-generation action MMORPG built on Unreal Engine 5 with a heavy focus on cinematic PvE, time manipulation mechanics, and a seamless open world designed for both PC and console. I played the closed beta, and while performance and polish were clearly not where they needed to be, I did come away thinking this game has real potential. Combat and movement feel very similar to New World, which could actually work in its favour now that New World's development has effectively ended. The story and time stop mechanics stood out as strong ideas, even if the execution still needs a little bit of work. Following beta feedback, the game has been delayed to late 2026, giving the team time to properly refine performance, the combat feel, and the systems. And if they use that time well, Chrono Odyssey could still land as a strong, console-friendly MMORPG. Profane is a true sandbox MMORPG that's been in development for a very long time, but after recent playtests in late 2025, it finally feels like it's getting closer to something real. The game is completely player-driven with no classes or levels, full loot open PvP, territory control, and a world where cities, villages, and even resources shift or disappear based on player actions. Combat styles are defined by what you practice, skills are discovered organically through progression, and risk versus reward is at the core of everything you do. Profane has always been a slow burn project, but with more frequent testing, expanded systems, and a much larger dev team behind it now, this could finally be at the point where it starts to move towards a proper release window in 2026. ArcheAge Chronicles is a full MMORPG developed by Excel Games and set around 50 years after the original ArcheAge, built on Unreal Engine 5 for PC and consoles. While it keeps core MMO pillars like exploration, life skills, housing, crafting, and shared world progression, it shifts away from tab target combat and large-scale Zerg PvP in favour of more fluid, action-based combat and smaller, more cooperative encounters. The focus is on discovery, narrative and player freedom in the rediscovered land of Aurora rather than constant mass PvP conflict. From what's been shown, it looks like a modern action-driven reinterpretation of the ArcheAge formula, with current expectations pointing towards a 2026 release window. Loftia is a cozy solo punk MMO scheduled for 2026, blending classic MMO ideas with life sim games like Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing. It's a persistent online world focused on cooperation rather than competition, where players build floating islands, form neighbourhoods, and contribute to shared community projects. Progression revolves around farming, crafting, decoration, exploration, and light group content like puzzles and environmental challenges. Loftia openly describes itself as a small-scale MMO, prioritising social play, creativity, and sustainability over combat-heavy systems. If you're looking for a relaxed, community-driven MMO that leans more into wholesome than hardcore, Loftia is aiming squarely at that space. Havenhold is an action sandbox MMORPG inspired by ancient Far Eastern mythology, built around skill-based combat, faction warfare, and player-driven progression. It features real-time action combat with parries, directional attacks, and large-scale PvP, including 20 vs 20 siege battles between rival mountain sects. Development has been active on Steam with ongoing regional testing in Asia, though English localization and Western servers are still catching up. One thing worth noting is the monetization. Steam already lists a deluxe edition which includes membership time, suggesting a buy-to-play model with a subscription-style system layered on top. It looks ambitious. Whether it lands well in 2026 will likely depend on how fair that monetization feels outside its core Asian audience. Drakantos is a pixel art fantasy MMORPG that focuses heavily on fast-paced dungeon runs, boss fights, and skill-driven combat. I played the beta in late 2025, and as somebody who loves pixel art games, it immediately hit that nostalgic arcade MMO feel, with each hero playing more like a distinct character than a traditional class. Early testing did have some issues with tile-based movement, especially in dungeons, but the developers have already reworked this based on feedback. With strong co-op PvE, competitive PvP, and regular hero updates planned, Drakantos is shaping up to be a more contained, replayable MMO experience heading into 2026. Eternal Tombs is a PvE-focused MMORPG built around dungeons, raids, and structured group content with a strong emphasis on cooperation and meaningful progression. I played this during a test back in 2024, and while it was a bit rough around the edges at times, the core ideas were really clear, especially the importance of group roles and tanking in PvE. What really set Eternal Tombs apart is its tomb-masked system, where live staff members actively trigger world events, unlock secret areas, and shape what's happening on each server in real time. It was originally planned for 2025, but after multiple tests, it's now looking more likely for 2026. And honestly, I'm happy to wait, because if they deliver on that dynamic PvE vision that they have, this could be something genuinely special. Bellatores is a open-world medieval MMORPG centered around noble houses, political conflict, and large-scale warfare, set in a 15th century inspired world. The game quietly disappeared for a long time, then unexpectedly resurfaced in 2025 with a closed beta in Asia before going quiet again, which naturally raises some questions. Visually, it looks far more impressive than its original reveal, with action-focused combat, classless weapon swapping, and a mastery-based progression system instead of traditional levels. At this point, it's hard to know exactly where it will land, especially with concerns around localization and potential monetization, but if it avoids heavy pay to win, it could end up being an interesting, politically driven MMORPG. Project Q is an upcoming cross-platform MMORPG from Lionheart Studios, the team behind Odin Valhalla Rising. It's being published globally by Kakao Games for PC and mobile. It's described as a large-scale, 3D seamless open-world MMO inspired by Norse mythology, with a camera perspective something like Lost Ark and Diablo, and a fully persistent world designed for cross-play between devices. The game aims to deliver cinematic visuals using Unreal Engine 5 and is targeting a release window around 2026 after its first reveal at G-Star in late 2024. While official gameplay details are still sparse in English, this looks like a serious AAA fantasy MMO effort, though there are already community concerns around monetization and balance given the developer's mobile heritage. Persist Online is a hardcore zombie MMO from the developers behind Tibia, which immediately gives it more credibility than most survival MMOs. It's set in a fully open world where every building can be entered, loot is always at risk, and PvP is a constant threat on your way back to safety. There are no classes, just skill trees that let you shape your character through crafting, combat, and utility choices. It's not really my type of genre, but considering this is Cipsoft's first major MMO outside of Tibia in nearly 3 decades, it's one of the more interesting experiments on the list, especially for players who enjoy old school risk, full loot tension, and unforgiving progression. Darkcraft is a newly announced Souls-like MMORPG set in a grim, dark fantasy world, blending stamina-based combat with open-world multiplayer systems. Every encounter is built around timing, positioning, and risk, with real consequences on death, including partial loot loss. What sets this apart is its game master-driven world, where live developers can trigger events, control enemies, appear as bosses, or introduce one-off quests that never repeat. You can explore solo or with friends, hunt bosses, join guilds, or clash with other players in high-tension PvPvE encounters. It will be free to play, unapologetically punishing, and clearly aimed at players who want MMO scale with Souls-like pressure. Elegon is a classic-inspired fantasy MMORPG being developed primarily by a solo indie developer, and it wears that old-school influence proudly. It's built around a seamless open world, stat-driven character progression, meaningful gear, and traditional group content like dungeons and raids, very much in the spirit of early World of Warcraft. The focus here isn't flashy systems or modern MMO shortcuts, but slow, earned progression, exploration, and community-driven gameplay. Elegon is subscription-based, with no cash shop or pay-to-win elements, and everything, including cosmetics, is earned in-game. It's still early in development, with no release window yet, but projects like this don't need massive scale to succeed. If it simply works and builds a small dedicated player base, Elegon could quietly become a cozy, long-term MMO worth sticking with. Asteria Fate of the Fallen is an anime-styled VR MMORPG inspired by the idea of Sword Art Online, but built as its own original IP rather than a direct adaptation. The goal here is immersion first, player housing, social hubs, crafting, and action combat where your real-world skill matters alongside character progression. It's very much a passion project, developed by a small but transparent team, and recently hit a major milestone with Spacetime DB integration, the same MMO backend tech being used by Bitcraft. Solid MMOs are incredibly rare, and this feels like a genuine attempt rather than a tech demo. It's still early and high risk, but with testing phases coming up, Asteria is one of the more interesting VR MMO projects to keep an eye on heading into 2026. Rixa is a small-scale sci-fi meets fantasy MMORPG that mixes classic MMO structure with a more experimental ability system. Players explore the alien planet of Rixa after a failed human colonization, operating from a central carrier hub while tackling story-driven PvE content and 5-player dungeons. Its standout feature is the nanobot ability system, which replaces traditional mana and colour-based resources generated through class choice and weapon stats, encouraging more deliberate ability planning. Combat is tab target focused, with an emphasis on weapons, gadgets, turrets, drones, and airstrikes rather than traditional armour. Information on Rixa is currently very limited, making it firmly one to watch rather than rely on, but as a sci-fi MMORPG, it at least brings something different to an otherwise fantasy-heavy 2026 lineup. Horizon Steel Frontiers is a mobile-first cross-platform MMORPG developed by NC Soft in collaboration with Guerrilla Games. Set in the Horizon universe, you play as a fully customizable machine hunter in the Deadlands, working with and sometimes against thousands of other players to take down massive mechanical creatures, compete for resources, and tackle raid-style PvE encounters. Combat builds on Horizon's signature weak point targeting and trap-based hunting, but adapts it for MMO-scale battles with mounts, climbing mechanics, and large group fights that feel closer to Monster Hunter than a traditional fantasy MMO. The game is being built specifically for mobile with PC support, and while there's no confirmed release date, the scope, partnerships, and public gameplay footage suggest it has a genuine outside chance of landing sometime in 2026. Perfect New World was an action MMORPG spin-off of the Perfect World IP, built around fast-paced combat, seamless exploration, and class-driven PvE and PvP. At one point, the game looked genuinely promising, with frequent trailers, developer videos, and a clear push towards a modern action MMO experience. However, there have been no official updates since late 2023. The studio behind it has reportedly undergone layoffs and ownership changes, and all official channels have gone silent. While nothing has been formally announced, based on the available evidence, Perfect New World appears to have been quietly scrapped and is extremely unlikely to release, making it another example of a high-profile MMORPG project that might have simply faded away. Into the Echo was an ambitious MMORPG project built around time travel, player identity, and a shared sci-fi fantasy world called Rava. On paper, it aimed to move away from traditional leveling, focusing instead on reputation, crafting, exploration, and community-driven progression across multiple eras of history. However, the reality is that the game hasn't seen any meaningful updates since 2023. The studio website is currently inaccessible, official socials are inactive, and the Discord is largely abandoned. At this point, Into the Echo appears effectively dead, and while the original vision was interesting, it's very unlikely this project makes it to a 2026 release. Other MMORPGs not mentioned include Project Ragnarok by NetEase, Chronicles of Asteria, which is apparently still being worked on, Project Triple L, Riot MMO, the rumoured EverQuest 3 and Guild Wars 3, Aeon and Final Fantasy XIV Mobile, the Rockstock MMO by Nintendo, and the Genesis Hoyoverse MMO, all of which I don't expect to see much of in 2026. So that's the full landscape as we head into 2026, from games that are basically ready to launch, to ambitious projects that could still surprise us, and a few that honestly feel like cautionary tales. MMORPG development is brutal, timelines constantly slip, and half of these games will look very different by the time they actually release. Personally, I'm most excited to see how VR MMORPGs evolve this year, but Eternal Tombs and Epitome are both very high on my radar, and after watching the recent Scars of Honor livestream, that's another one that I'm quietly rooting for. Let me know in the comments below which MMORPGs you're most excited for, and which one you think will be DOA. And if I've missed any games you think that deserve to be on this list, especially some of the smaller or some of the indie projects, drop them in the comments below. I do read every comment, and I will keep my tracking list updated. Here's to hoping 2026 is finally the year MMORPGs start to rise and deliver again.